I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. On the Senate floor this past Thursday, Senator Ted Cruz blasted Democrats over their calls for gun control. His remarks come after a string of recent mass shootings led to public outcry for action on guns. The Texas lawmaker accused Democrats of, quote, disarming law-abiding citizens. The Republican senator suggested instead to, quote, target the bad guys. Listen in as he explains.
Which is a political debate that breaks out within seconds of the crime occurring. There are two principal approaches one can take to try to prevent crimes like this. One is to target the bad guys, to focus on criminals, to focus on felons, to focus on fugitives, to focus on those trying to illegally buy guns, to put them in jail, to lock them up, to get them off the street so that they cannot terrorize and murder innocent people. That's the approach that actually works. That's the approach that is actually successful. That's the approach that is most likely to prevent subsequent mass murders. There's a second approach, which is an approach that is disarming law-abiding citizens. Inevitably, Democrat members of this chamber, minutes after an attack, move towards wanting to disarm law-abiding citizens. That approach is, I believe, number one, unconstitutional. But number two, it doesn't work. It is ineffective. Put simply, taking guns away from law-abiding citizens, disarming you or disarming me, is not going to stop a mass murder. And we know this. If you look across the country consistently, the jurisdictions with the strictest gun control laws, over and over again, have among the highest crime rates and among the highest murder rates. When you disarm law-abiding citizens, what happens is the people who follow the law disarm. That's almost by definition if they're law-abiding citizens. But the criminals don't follow the laws. And if you disarm all the victims, the result is it's easier for the criminals to commit their acts of mayhem. Mr. President, let me point out a statistic that many Americans don't know. It's a statistic that comes from the Barack Obama White House, so it is hardly a right-wing source. According to the Barack Obama White House, every year in America, firearms are used defensively to stop a crime between 500,000 and 1 million times each and every year. What does that mean? That means that if Democrat proposals to disarm law-abiding citizens succeed, the result will be even more crimes. The result will be those 500,000 to 1 million crimes that are right now stopped every year won't be stopped. That means more assaults. That means more sexual assaults. That means more murders. That means single moms riding home on the train, if they're not able to have a revolver in their purse to defend themselves from marauding criminals, then they're left defenseless. In debates over how to approach violent crime, that 500,000 to 1 million people each year who are using a firearm to stop a crime, they get left out of a lot of these discussions. But they would be victims if Democratic senators succeed in taking away their right to keep and bear arms. When you and I were brand new here, in the wake of Newtown, Connecticut, there was a Democrat majority in this body at the time. Harry Reid was the majority leader. Barack Obama had just been reelected president. And you will recall well, Senate Democrats were exultant. Senator Schumer was on TV saying we were in the sweet spot to finally pass far-reaching gun control. And I will tell you, the colleagues on my side of the aisle were discouraged and demoralized. And many thought there was nothing we could do to stop the agenda that was being pushed forward. Well, I can tell you I didn't believe it then, and I don't believe it now. And so I sat down and drafted legislation designed to actually do what every person in this chamber, I believe, really wants to do, which is stop violent crime, stop these murders, stop the next lunatic who would shoot up a school or shoot up a church or shoot up a mall or shoot up a grocery store. The legislation I drafted was called Grassley-Cruz. I teamed up with my colleague, the senior senator from Iowa, Chuck Grassley. Grassley-Cruz focused on several things. First of all, it focused on strengthening the background check system. It required the Department of Justice to conduct an audit of every federal agency to make sure that any felony convictions are reported to the background check system. It provided funding and incentives for states to report felony convictions to the background check system. Interestingly, many states have a lousy record of reporting felonies to the background check database. Ironically, many of those are blue states led by Democrats who talk about gun control, and yet the state governments and local governments often fail to report felony convictions to the database. Grassley-Cruz provided strong incentives to get those felony convictions in the database. Secondly, Grassley-Cruz provided funding for prosecutors to prosecute those who commit violent crimes with firearms and put them in jail. Third, Grassley-Cruz provided funding for the Department of Justice to create a gun crime task force to prosecute felons and fugitives who try to illegally buy guns. Mr. President, many people don't know this, but it's actually quite shocking. The Department of Justice has a consistent pattern of refusing to prosecute felons and fugitives who illegally try to buy guns. In the year 2010, roughly 48,000 felons and fugitives tried to illegally purchase firearms. Of those 48,000, the Obama Justice Department prosecuted 44 of them. Not even 50, 44 out of 48,000. I think that is completely unacceptable. So Grassley-Cruz provided funding and directed the Department of Justice, prosecute them and put them in jail. And on top of that, Grassley-Cruz created grants for schools to enhance school safety, to enhance security, to make our schools and make our kids safer. So, Mr. President, what happened? Well, Grassley-Cruz, we voted on it here on the floor of the Senate. And Grassley-Cruz received a majority vote on the Senate floor. 52 senators voted in favor of Grassley-Cruz, including 9 Democrats. Remember, this was a Democrat Senate. Democrats had a sizable majority, and yet 9 Democrats, we got the most bipartisan support of any of the comprehensive legislation that was considered on the floor. So why didn't Grassley-Cruz pass into law? We got a majority vote in the Senate. Well, the answer is simple. Grassley-Cruz didn't pass because Senate Democrats filibustered it. They demanded 60 votes, and so even though it got a majority, it didn't get 60 and it didn't pass. Now, Mr. President, I'm going to share something that is deeply frustrating. There is a powerful argument that had Grassley-Cruz passed, had Senate Democrats not filibustered it, that multiple of these mass shootings in Texas could have been prevented. Let's start with Sutherland Springs. Sutherland Springs should never have happened. The shooter was doubly ineligible to buy a firearm. He had a felony conviction and a domestic violence conviction. So under federal law, existing federal law, it was illegal for him to buy a gun. So how did he get his gun? Well, the Air Force in the Obama administration failed to report his felony conviction to the background check database. It wasn't in there. So the shooter went to buy a gun. He filled out the background check form and he lied. He lied on the form. The form asked, do you have a felony conviction? He said no. Form asked, do you have a domestic violence conviction? He said no. They ran the check and it came up clean, because the Obama Air Force never reported the felony, and so it wasn't in the database, and so it came up clean. He bought that gun and he used it to murder those innocent people in that beautiful sanctuary. If Grassley Cruz had passed, presumably the mandated Department of Justice audit of every federal agency would have caught that felony conviction. The whole purpose of the audit was to make sure we catch every felony conviction that's out there, which would have meant his conviction would have been in the database. But that's where the second part of Grassley Cruz matters. Because when he went in and lied on that form, he committed 2 more felonies. When he checked, I don't have a felony conviction, that's a felony. Lying on that form is a felony. It is a crime. When he checked, I don't have a domestic violence conviction, that's a felony. And Grassley Cruz would have directed the Department of Justice, prosecute him, and put him in jail. And that monster would have been locked in a 6x8 concrete cell instead of murdering innocent people in the wonderful community of Sutherland Springs. You also look at Santa Fe and Uvalde, and there's a possibility that both of those crimes could have been prevented by Grassley Cruz. Part of Grassley Cruz was funding to enhance school security, grants to go to schools. One of the things that is frustrating about these school shootings is they follow predictable patterns. In Parkland, Florida, the shooter jumped over a fence and came inside. In Santa Fe, the shooter went in an unlocked side entrance. Afterwards, the Santa Fe High School is less than an hour from my house. I was at home that morning, the morning of the shooting. I was on that campus about an hour after the shooting occurred. It was horrific. It was tragic. I grieved and cried with the parents who lost their children that day. I remember sitting down afterwards at a round table with the parents from Santa Fe and parents from other mass shootings that had occurred, and talking about what are the solutions we can do? How can we prevent this? One of the solutions we discussed were best practices. How do you make a school safer? One of those best practices is limiting the number of entrances to a school. Ideally, bringing it down to one single main entrance, the front entrance. Now, that doesn't mean, as some on the Twitter sphere has said, that you have no fire exits. Of course you have fire exits. It means you do what we do in many other places, in federal buildings, in banks, in courthouses. It is a standard security step to have one major entrance to a building if that building is at risk of violence. And that one main entrance is then much, much safer if you have armed police officers at that entrance. When you go into a bank, there's a reason you see an armed officer at the entrance. When you go into a courthouse, there's a reason you see an armed officer at the entrance. When you go into the United States Capitol, there's a reason you see an armed officer at the entrance. Our kids are at least as valuable. If the Santa Fe High School or the Robs Elementary School had been able to get a school funding grant to enhance security, those crimes could have been prevented. Because I'll tell you, when I was in Uvalde the day after the shooting, what was so infuriating is that monster got in the exact same way, through an open back door. Just like in Santa Fe, he got in through an open back door, he got into the classroom, and he began murdering children long before he encountered anyone from law enforcement. if instead that door had been locked, if he had been forced to come around to the front main entrance, if at the front main entrance there were armed police officers, they could have shot that monster dead outside, and 19 children and 2 teachers would still be alive. So, like millions across this country, I am angry. I'm angry that these horrific crimes keep happening. But I'm also angry that this august chamber plays political games.